I never thought the sound of cardboard boxes could make my stomach twist. But that morning, standing in my own living room, I watched my brother's wife stack them against the wall like they owned the place. Toys spilled across the floor, the faint smell of takeout and baby lotion mixing in the air that used to smell like lavender and coffee. My mother stood near the doorway, her purse still hanging from her arm, surveying everything with calm authority. "They'll only be here for a little while, Lauren," she said, her voice gentle but absolute. Family helps family. I'd heard those words my entire life, and every time they meant one thing, I was the one expected to help. My brother Brian grinned at me from the couch, cracking open a can of soda like this was some kind of reunion instead of an invasion. "Hey, sis, it's just temporary. Promise." The same word Mom had used. Temporary. I wanted to laugh, but it would have come out like a scream. My apartment, the one I'd paid rent for every single month for 7 years, was now a crash pad for my unemployed brother, his wife, and their 2 kids. The walls I'd painted myself, the kitchen I'd remodeled, the quiet sanctuary I built after years of grinding through overtime hours gone just like that. "You should be proud, honey," Mom added, patting my arm as if I'd been promoted, not evicted. "Brian's had a rough year, and Jenna's doing her best. The kids need stability." I looked around the apartment at the life I'd built with care, now drowned in chaos. My own mother was treating me like the safety net she could stretch until it snapped. The unfairness burned through me, sharp, humiliating, electric. I wanted to tell her no to stand my ground, but in my family, no was never an option. Not for me. "Sure," I said, finally, the word dry on my tongue. "Just temporary." My mother smiled, satisfied. Brian turned on the TV, already shouting for his kids to unpack their things. And as the sound of cartoons filled the air, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of my erasure inside my own home. I wasn't always the kind of woman who let people walk all over her. At least that's what I used to tell myself. I built my independence brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, through late nights in an office where I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. At 34, I'd worked my way from an entry-level assistant to a marketing manager at a firm in Denver, earning enough to cover my own bills, pay rent on time, and even help my parents when they needed it. My father, Richard, often said he admired my work ethic. My mother, Evelyn, simply nodded and said, "That's what women do, we manage." That was her version of praise. I'd been renting their investment property since I was 27. It wasn't charity. I paid every cent on time every month. When I moved in, the apartment was a beige, lifeless space with water stains on the ceiling and ancient light fixtures that buzzed. I repainted every wall, replaced the fixtures, installed new cabinet handles, and even fixed a stubborn leak under the sink myself. Over time, it became mine in every way except legally. Mom liked to remind me, "It's still our property, dear. Don't get too attached." But I was attached. It was the first place that ever felt like mine, not something borrowed or shared or sacrificed. I thought my parents appreciated my responsibility, but in our family, reliability wasn't rewarded, it was exploited. Brian, my older brother, was the opposite. At 36, he was a walking excuse factory. He'd dropped out of college 3 times, switched jobs more often than he changed phone plans, and somehow always managed to be between opportunities. Our mother worshipped him. "He just needs time," she'd say, as if time were a currency that never ran out. When we were kids, I'd clean the kitchen while Brian played video games. Mom would say, "He's tired, Lauren. Let him rest." When we grew up, nothing changed, only the excuses got more expensive. Brian always had bad bosses, unfair landlords, or unexpected bills, and Mom always covered him. "He's had it harder than you," she'd remind me, her tone heavy with implication. "You're stronger, you'll figure things out." That phrase haunted me. You'll figure things out. Translation: you'll clean up his mess, pay the bill, keep things running, because you're the woman, because you're the daughter, because that's what I was raised to do, make myself small so others could stay comfortable. My father stayed silent through it all, retreating behind his newspaper, letting Mom's decisions become family law. I used to think his quiet meant peace. Later, I realized it meant surrender. Before my brother moved in, I still believed in balance. I thought as long as I kept my head down and worked hard, life would stay predictable. I paid rent early, kept receipts, even sent polite updates about minor repairs to make sure everything was transparent. But in my family, fairness was flexible, especially when Brian was involved. The moment my mother said, "He just needs a place for a while," I should have recognized the pattern. She wasn't asking, she was announcing, and I wasn't being included, I was being volunteered. When I replayed that night in my head, the way my father stayed quiet, the way Brian smirked when Mom spoke for him, I realized I'd never had real authority in this family. I'd been raised to be useful, not respected. I remember sitting alone in my apartment that evening before they arrived, sipping cold coffee, looking at the neat rows of books, the framed photos of my solo trips, the plants thriving on the windowsill. Every piece of that space reflected my discipline and freedom. I didn't know then that I was about to lose both. Somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the calm before the storm, that sharp, invisible warning that something you love is about to be taken. And the worst part, you'll be told it's for your own good. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had always been an uneasy ritual. The smell of roast chicken, the hum of old jazz on the radio, and my mother's insistence that we eat as a family created an illusion of warmth that always felt rehearsed. That evening, 3 months before everything collapsed, I sat across from Brian as he complained about his landlord raising the rent again. "It's criminal, really," he said, stabbing his fork into the mashed potatoes. "People like me can't catch a break." My mother sighed in sympathy, as though Brian's lifelong pattern of irresponsibility was an act of fate instead of choice. "He's doing his best," she said, shooting me a warning look before I could open my mouth. I bit my tongue, focusing on slicing my chicken into small, perfect pieces. "Have you looked into housing assistance programs?" I asked carefully. "Denver has a few for families with kids." Mom's fork froze midair. "Lauren, don't be condescending. He doesn't need a handout, he needs support." "That is support, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "He has 2 kids, no steady income, and he's their father," she interrupted sharply. "And he'll figure it out." The hypocrisy burned. She'd never said that about me. When I struggled in my early 20s, working 2 jobs to stay afloat, there had been no sympathy, only lectures about budgeting and responsibility. Brian cleared his throat dramatically. "Actually, my landlord's a nightmare. He says I have to pay rent on the 1st. No exceptions." He laughed like it was a joke. I nearly choked on my water. "That's how rent works," I said. My father, Richard, hid behind his glass of wine. He looked exhausted, like a man too used to losing arguments to bother trying. My mother placed a hand on Brian's. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll land on your feet. You always do." I couldn't help myself, usually because someone else cushions your fall. The table went silent. Mom's eyes hardened. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "He's family." There it was again. Family, the word that excused everything. Speaking of family, she continued, brightly changing the subject with practiced ease. "We've been thinking your brother and Jenna might need a place to stay for a little while, just until things stabilize." My fork froze. "With me? Well, you've got that second bedroom you use as an office," she said, smiling as if she were suggesting something simple and reasonable. "And the kids could share the room. It'll be fun, like a sleepover." Fun. That was her word for chaos she didn't have to manage. I glanced at my father. He looked down at his plate, silently chewing, offering me no rescue. My pulse quickened. "Mom, I work from home 3 days a week. I need my office space." "You can set up in your bedroom," she said, her tone dismissive, like she'd solved a trivial problem. "Family comes first, Lauren. You can adjust for a while." Her words hit me harder than they should have. Adjust. For a while. Temporary. I'd heard it all before. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. "Maybe they should stay with you," I suggested, my voice flat. "We don't have the space," she replied instantly. "And at our age, we couldn't handle young children running around." The irony was suffocating. My father reached for another roll, pretending the conversation wasn't happening. "Just think about it," Mom said finally, her tone final, as if my consent didn't matter. That night, driving home through the quiet Denver streets, I replayed her words over and over. Family comes first. It sounded noble, but I'd learned what it really meant in our household. It meant Brian comes first. And as the streetlights flickered across my windshield, a truth I didn't want to face settled in my chest. It wasn't a question of if they'd move in. It was only when. It happened 2 weeks later without warning, like a storm that rolled in while you were still convincing yourself the sky looked clear. I came home from work on a Thursday evening, heels clicking against the tile keys jingling in my hand, ready for a quiet night and leftover pasta. Instead, I opened the door to find chaos had already unpacked itself. Boxes were stacked along the hallway. A half-inflated air mattress blocked the entry to my office. Children's shoes littered the floor like breadcrumbs leading to my stolen peace. "Surprise," Brian said, grinning from the couch. The TV was already on volume high, a bag of chips in his lap. "Mom said you wouldn't mind us moving in early. Hope that's okay." I froze in the doorway, gripping my purse strap. "Early, yeah," Jenna chimed in from the kitchen where she was unpacking mismatched dishes onto my counter. "The landlord told us we had to be out by today. It was super stressful, but your mom said we could come straight here." Your mom, not our mom. It wasn't lost on me. "She didn't mention that to me," I said, my voice steady but tight. Brian shrugged. "She probably forgot. You know how she gets." His tone was casual, like this was all a misunderstanding instead of a violation. "We'll be out of your hair in a month or two." I looked around at the mess. Toys, blankets, grocery bags, and a flat-screen TV twice the size of mine. "Where are you planning to sleep?" I asked, even though I already knew. "We thought the kids could take your office and we'll use the couch for now," Jenna said, as if she were granting me a favor. "It'll be temporary." Temporary, the family's favorite lie. I could feel the walls closing in. "We need to set some ground rules," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. Brian smirked. "You sound like my old boss." "I'm serious. If we're sharing space, we need boundaries, chores, quiet hours, bills." Jenna rolled her eyes, not even trying to hide it. "Lauren, relax. We're family, not roommates." "Exactly," I said, "which means I need my family to respect my space." Brian stood stretching like a cat who knew he owned the room. "Come on, sis, don't be uptight. We're just trying to get by." "On my dime," I muttered, but he didn't hear or pretended not to. That first night was the worst. The kids shrieked as they ran through the hallways. Jenna's phone blared TikTok videos. The smell of microwaved popcorn mixed with the faint scent of my lavender candle clashing in a way that made me nauseous. I locked myself in my bedroom laptop open on my knees, trying to focus on a marketing report, while the walls shook with laughter and cartoons. At midnight, when the noise finally died down, I slipped into the kitchen for water. Brian's gaming console glowed in the dark cords snaking across the floor. He was still awake, headset on, shouting into the mic, a beer can balanced on my coffee table. "Can you keep it down?" I whispered. He paused, the game, shot me an incredulous look and said, "You're no fun. You know that. Mom always said you take life too seriously." I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned, walked to my room, and closed the door quietly. The way you do when you realize fighting won't change anything. It'll just prove you care more than they ever will. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, counting the muffled footsteps of people who didn't belong there. My home felt smaller with every breath. That night, I learned what real silence was: not peace, but suffocation. It was the kind that comes when you've lost control, and no one even realizes you had any to begin with. The first week was a blur of noise clutter, and polite smiles stretched thin over frustration. Every morning, I woke to the sound of Tyler's cartoons blaring in the living room and the smell of burnt toast drifting through the apartment. Jenna left coffee stains on my counter. Ryan, no Brian, I had to remind myself, left socks everywhere, and the kids treated every surface like a jungle gym. I told myself to breathe, to be patient, to remember that it was temporary. But patience doesn't rebuild peace once it's broken, it just delays the explosion. On the second Wednesday, I was in the middle of a virtual client meeting when chaos erupted outside my bedroom door. "Uncle Brian, look!" Tyler yelled, jumping from the couch. I muted myself just as a loud crash followed. My manager's face froze on screen mid-sentence. "Everything okay over there?" she asked. "Family staying with you?" My throat tightened. Just for a bit, I said, forcing a smile. Temporary. It became my most used word. Temporary noise. Temporary chaos. Temporary disrespect. That evening, I came home from the office to find that all the groceries I'd prepped for the week, marinated chicken, fresh vegetables, yogurt, were gone. In their place was a note scrawled in Jenna's loopy handwriting, needed to make dinner for the kids. We'll replace soon. The replacements never came. When I confronted her, she shrugged. You make more money, Lauren. It's just groceries. It's about respect, I said, and accountability. You sound just like my mother. She shot back, rolling her eyes. Relax. The conversation ended with me cleaning her dishes from my sink. A few days later, I found Emma in my bedroom sitting on the floor surrounded by my makeup. My $80 foundation was smeared across her tiny fingers, my eyeshadow palettes destroyed. Emma, I gasped. Jenna appeared in the doorway unbothered. She's just playing dress up. Don't make her feel bad. She ruined my things. I said, my voice trembling. That makeup costs more than your week's groceries. Jenna crossed her arms. Maybe don't leave things where she can reach them. The injustice burned like acid. In my room, I asked, You mean the one I pay for? Her eyes narrowed. Wow. You really like reminding people you pay for everything, huh? She walked away before I could answer. That night, I found Brian asleep on the couch, surrounded by empty beer cans. The kids' toys were scattered across the floor, and my office, my sanctuary, was unrecognizable. Sticky fingerprints on my keyboard, crayons on my reports, a juice stain on the carpet. I knelt down to clean it, feeling something inside me crack. This wasn't temporary. This was invasion disguised as family. Over the next 2 weeks, my bills doubled. The electric bill skyrocketed from all-day TV and endless laundry. The hot water ran out before I showered. My internet lagged during work calls because Brian was streaming games. My productivity tanked, and my boss, Diana, noticed. You're slipping, she told me one Friday, her voice sharp but not unkind. This isn't you. I wanted to tell her everything, but shame stopped me. I didn't want to sound like a woman who couldn't control her own home. It's just a temporary family situation, I said again, and even I didn't believe it. That night, lying awake, I listened to the sound of laughter and the clinking of beer bottles through the wall. I realized that my home, my hard-earned, peaceful home, had become a shelter for people who contributed nothing but noise. And my mother had engineered it all with one phrase she'd repeated my whole life. Family comes first. But what she never said was that in our family that meant I came last. It was a Saturday morning when I realized I wasn't just tired, I was disappearing. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, catching on the dust floating in the air, and for a moment I didn't even recognize my own apartment. Toys covered the floor. The couch cushions were stained. There were cereal bowls in the sink and an open jar of peanut butter on the counter. My once peaceful space had become a daycare. I made coffee, trying to steady myself when my phone buzzed Mom. "Good morning, sweetheart," she chirped. "I've been thinking. You've been quiet lately." I hesitated. "Because my home's been invaded, Mom." She sighed, the kind of sigh that made me feel like a child again. "Don't exaggerate. They're family, and they need you." "I've needed me too," I said, "but no one seems to notice." There was silence, then the tone that always followed when I didn't submit fast enough. "You've always been so dramatic, Lauren. I raised you to be generous, not selfish." The word selfish hit harder than it should have. She continued, "Anyway, Brian said you've been a bit tense. You should be grateful you can help. Not everyone can." "Grateful." I laughed. "For what, being a free babysitter and landlord?" "Watch your tone, young lady," she warned. "Your father and I have done plenty for you." That was her go-to shield. Every dollar she'd ever spent on me was an eternal debt I was meant to repay. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. That afternoon, when I came home from running errands, I found Brian sprawled on the couch playing video games. "Hey," I said carefully, "did you send the $200 for utilities this month?" He didn't even pause the game. "Yeah, about that. Jenna needed new shoes for the kids. I'll catch you next time." "Next time?" My voice shook. "Brian, this isn't optional." He finally looked at me, annoyance flickering in his eyes. You make good money, Lauren. Stop acting broke. It's not about money. It's about respect. You really like that word, he muttered. You sound like one of those bossy HR people. Respect isn't bossy, I said, but he had already gone back to his game. I turned toward my bedroom, trying to calm down, when I noticed something on my dresser, my grandmother's silver jewelry box open. Inside the locket she'd given me was missing. My chest tightened. Where's my necklace? I asked, turning toward Jenna, who was folding laundry on the table. Oh, Emma was playing with it earlier. I think she put it somewhere. You let a 4-year-old play with a family heirloom? Relax. It's just jewelry. My voice rose before I could stop it. It's not just jewelry. It's the only thing I have left from Grandma. Jenna looked at me like I was insane. You need to chill out. It's not healthy to get this worked up over stuff. Something snapped. You're right, I said quietly. This isn't healthy. I walked into my room, closed the door, and for the first time in years, I cried ugly, shaking sobs that wouldn't stop. Because I wasn't crying over a necklace. I was crying over everything I'd lost: privacy, peace, dignity. My home had become a reminder that no matter how successful I was, my family still saw me as the helper, the fallback plan, the woman who would figure things out. When I wiped my face and looked in the mirror, my reflection startled me. My eyes were red, my shoulders slumped, but underneath it all was something new, a spark. A quiet, dangerous clarity. I whispered it aloud, testing the words on my tongue. I'm done. That night, as the sound of laughter filled my stolen apartment, I lay awake planning not revenge, not cruelty, but something sharper, a strategy, because I finally understood kindness without boundaries isn't virtue, it's self-destruction. The next morning, I woke up with an odd sense of calm, the kind that comes right before a storm you've decided not to run from anymore. The coffee tasted stronger. The sunlight through the blinds looked sharper. My decision had settled in overnight like a quiet promise. When Mom called again, I answered. Morning, sweetheart, she said cheerfully. I just spoke to Brian. He says you've been difficult lately. I laughed softly. Is that what he said, Lauren? She said in that warning tone. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You know how much they're struggling. They're not struggling, Mom, I said evenly. They're relaxing. In my apartment. On my income. Don't be cruel, she snapped. You've always been too hard on your brother. He's had such a tough life. Tough, I repeated, incredulous. He's had people cleaning up after him since high school. You've handed him money every time he's failed, and now you've handed him my home. She went silent for a moment. Then her voice softened into manipulation. You know your father and I have been discussing the rent situation. It's unfair for you to have all that space to yourself while they're crammed in like sardines. I froze. What are you saying? We think it's reasonable for you to give them the master bedroom, she said, her voice steady as if she were discussing a grocery list. The children need stability, and since you work, you can use the smaller room. It's just practical. Practical. My voice came out lower, quieter, scarier. Mom, that's my bedroom. It's our property, she said sharply. And since there are 5 people using the utilities now, we also think it's fair to double your rent. You can afford it, can't you? I actually laughed then because the absurdity of it was almost surreal. You want me to pay double rent to live in my own apartment while supporting 4 other people who don't pay anything? Family helps family, Lauren, she said, unbothered. You're being selfish. That word again, selfish, wielded like a blade. My father's voice drifted faintly in the background. Maybe we should talk about this later, he murmured. But Mom ignored him. You have until next week to decide, she said briskly. We'll need to adjust the rental agreement. I'll have your father email it to you. And she hung up. For a long moment, I just stood there, the phone buzzing in my hand, the world narrowing to a sharp point of disbelief. Then I laughed again softly, this time almost to myself. Not because it was funny, but because it was final. There it was. Proof. They didn't see me as a daughter. I was an asset, a paycheck with legs. That evening, I walked into the living room to find Brian playing his video game, his kids eating chips on the carpet. Jenna scrolling through her phone. Mom called. I said, voice calm. She thinks I should pay double rent and give you the master bedroom. Brian didn't even look up. That sounds fair. The way he said it casual and titled made my chest tighten. And what exactly do you plan to contribute? I asked. He shrugged. When I get back on my feet, I'll help out. Promise. I stared at him, something cold and steady rising in my chest. You've been promising that for 15 years. He rolled his eyes. You always were the dramatic one. You're right, I said softly. Not anymore. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My fingers didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I opened a blank spreadsheet the same way I'd done countless times at work. Except this time, I wasn't budgeting for clients. I was budgeting for freedom, because I wasn't going to argue anymore. I was going to disappear on my own terms. That night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning, the glow of my laptop lighting the room where I'd once felt safe. The voices from the living room had finally gone quiet. Brian snoring, the kids asleep, the TV still humming faintly because Jenna never turned it off. I opened a new spreadsheet titled Exit Strategy. For years, I'd used those same cells to track campaigns budgets had spent. Now I was tracking my own liberation. I listed every expense: rent, utilities, groceries, car insurance. Then I listed what I'd been paying because of them. My grocery bill had doubled. My electric bill was up 40%. My water usage had tripled. All the numbers told one clear story: I'd been subsidizing their comfort at the cost of my peace. I calculated how much I could save if I moved out immediately. If I used a portion of my down payment fund, I could afford first and last month's rent on a new place, maybe even a small deposit on furniture. My pulse steadied as I worked. Strategy was something I understood. Chaos, I did not. And this was how I reclaimed control, one line item at a time. The next day at work, I approached my boss Diana during lunch. You have a minute, I asked. She looked up from her salad. Sure, what's up? I need a personal day tomorrow, I said, careful not to sound desperate. Something's come up at home. She studied me for a long moment. You've been off lately, she said gently. This about your family? My composure cracked just enough. They moved in, without asking. Her eyes softened. Lauren, you can't live like that. Take 2 days. Find a place. Fix it. Gratitude swelled in my chest. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me, she said. Just get your life back. The next morning, I toured 6 apartments. The first smelled like mildew. The second had paper-thin walls. The third was perfect until the landlord mentioned it was above a nightclub. I almost gave up, but the 6th place changed everything. It was a small 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of an old red brick building owned by an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins. He wore suspenders, smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, and greeted me with the kind of politeness you don't see anymore. We've had this building 40 years, he said, unlocking the door. We believe in treating tenants fair. The space was modest but sunlit, polished wood floors, large windows, a little balcony overlooking a quiet street. It felt like oxygen. How soon could I move in? I asked. Well, he said thoughtfully, the last tenant just left. We could have it ready next weekend. I didn't even hesitate. I'll take it. I signed the lease right then and there, using part of my savings for the deposit. As he handed me the keys, something shifted inside me, like my lungs remembered how to fill again. The next week, I started packing. Quietly. Strategically. Each night, after everyone had gone to bed, I packed 1 box: winter clothes, books, dishes I didn't use often, and carried it to the trunk of my car under the cover of darkness. I hid smaller boxes at my office, labeling them as project files. It was tedious, but liberating. With every item removed, I felt lighter. I left behind what wasn't mine: the furniture, the old appliances, even the rugs I'd bought years ago that Mom still claimed as hers. What I took were the essentials: my clothes, my laptop, my jewelry minus Grandma's missing locket, and my sense of self-respect. On the last night, I packed my final box, a stack of photo frames. One of them was a family photo from my college graduation. I looked at my mother's proud smile, my father's tired eyes, Brian's lazy smirk. I slid it into the box face down. The next morning, while they were visiting my parents, my best friend Tara came over. Ready? She asked. More than ever. By noon, my car was full. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter with my keys and a note that said, "Only I found my own place." Good luck. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. I just listened to the silence, real silence for the first time in months. The next morning, my phone lit up before I'd even finished unpacking the first box. 5 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Dad, 2 from Brian. I didn't answer any of them. The apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood polish sunlight pouring through the windows like a blessing. I brewed coffee, real coffee in peace, and stood barefoot on the balcony, watching the city wake up. For the first time in months, no one was shouting. No one was taking. No one was calling me selfish. When the phone buzzed again, I finally picked up. Lauren. Mom's voice was sharp, brittle. "Where are you? Brian said you vanished." "You can't just leave like that." "I can," I said calmly, stirring sugar into my cup. And I did. There was a stunned pause. "What do you mean you did? You can't just abandon your family?" "I didn't abandon anyone. I just stopped funding their lifestyle." "Lauren," she said, switching to that slow, dangerous tone. "We had an agreement. You pay rent to us." "I left the keys and this month's payment on the counter," I replied. "The apartment is yours now to manage to clean and to deal with." "What about Brian?" she snapped. "What about the children? They have nowhere else to go." "Then they can go to your house," I said evenly. "You've been their safety net their whole lives. Time to use it." "That's not possible," she said quickly. "Your father and I don't have space." "Funny," I said. "Neither did I." The silence that followed was volcanic. Then she hissed, "You've always been ungrateful." "After everything we've done for you, everything you did was for Brian," I interrupted quietly. "I just paid for it." She inhaled sharply. "You don't mean that." "I do." I hung up before she could recover. That afternoon, I turned my phone off entirely. For 2 days, the world was blissfully still. I unpacked slowly, rearranging furniture, setting up my new desk near the window. Mr. Jenkins dropped by with a welcome basket bred honey and a tiny potted fern. "New beginnings deserve green things," he said kindly. I nearly cried. On the 3rd day, I turned my phone back on. There were 22 missed calls, 8 voicemails, and a string of text messages. Dad's voice was weary in one of them. "Your mother's upset. Brian's angry. Just call us." Brian's text read, "You took my stuff. Real classy move, sis." Another followed, "You'll pay for this." "Mom says we can evict you legally." I laughed out loud. "From what?" "My own life." I typed back one simple reply. "The lease was in my name. Check with the landlord." A few hours later, Dad called again. I answered this time. His tone was softer but cautious. "Lauren, your mother's heartbroken. She says the apartment's a mess. Brian told her you took the appliances. The appliances I bought: the coffee maker, the blender, the ones I paid for." She didn't realize that he said quickly, "You know how she gets." "Yes," I said. "I know exactly how she gets. She's worried this will ruin the family," he continued. "You can't just walk away." "Dad," I said quietly, "I didn't walk away from the family. I walked away from being used." He didn't respond. Just a long sigh, the kind that sounded like surrender. "Your mother wants to see your new place." "Not yet," I said. "I need time, space." "She won't like that. She doesn't have to." That evening, I sat on the balcony sipping tea as the sky turned orange. For the first time in years, I felt something that resembled peace. Not because things were fixed, but because I'd finally stopped fixing everyone else. As the streetlights flickered on, I whispered to myself, "You're free." And this time, I believed it. A week passed before the next call came. This time, it was Dad again. His voice was tired, but something in it had changed. "Your mother and I went to the apartment today," he began. "It's not good." I leaned against my kitchen counter, the warmth of my mug grounding me. "Define not good." "It looks like a tornado hit it," he admitted. "Trash everywhere. Stains on the carpet. Broken lamp. Your mother's furious, of course, but she's realizing something. That maybe she backed the wrong child, I said before I could stop myself. He sighed a long exhale that sounded more like defeat than reprimand. Brian says you took things that didn't belong to you. If by things he means the coffee maker and laptop I bought, then yes, I said. Everything else in that apartment, furniture, appliances, was theirs or yours. I left it all. He's in trouble, Lauren, Dad said finally. He doesn't have a job. Jenna's talking about moving back with her parents. They've asked us for help again. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. And what did you say? He hesitated. Your mother told him we can't keep supporting them. We co-signed a new lease for them in a cheaper area, but she told him very firmly that the rent's on him now. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. My mother, the same woman who'd spent my entire life cushioning Brian's failures, had finally drawn a line. What changed? I asked quietly. You leaving? He said simply. You showed her what happens when you stop enabling people. I think she's realizing how much she leaned on you to keep everything stable. I swallowed hard. And how's Brian taking it? Not well, Dad said. He called me yesterday to complain that his boss at the grocery store expects too much. But at least he has a boss now. He's working full-time, shift supervisor already. He's actually showing up. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but maybe losing your apartment was the best thing that could have happened to him. I sat there stunned, staring out the window. For years, I'd begged my parents to stop babying him, to make him face reality. And now, somehow my absence had done what all my words couldn't. Mom still isn't happy with me, is she? I asked after a pause. She's embarrassed, he admitted, but not angry. Not really. She misses you. Misses me. I laughed softly. She made me the villain, Dad. Maybe, he said gently. But she's also realizing you were the only one holding the family together. Without you, things fell apart. And when things fall apart, people finally see what was holding them up. The words hit deep, not because they were comforting, but because they were true. I had spent my entire life being the responsible one, the steady one, the quiet one who handled things so others didn't have to. I'd mistaken that for love. But it wasn't love, it was labor. And I was finally done working for people who never saw my worth. That weekend, I invited Dad over for coffee. He arrived alone, holding a small envelope. Your mother wanted you to have this, he said. Inside was my grandmother's silver locket, the one that had gone missing when Emma had been playing. I ran my thumb over the worn engraving. It was slightly tarnished but intact. She found it in Emma's toy box, Dad said quietly. She said it should be with you. For the first time in months, my throat tightened for a different reason. Not anger, not exhaustion, but something that almost resembled forgiveness. Tell her thank you, I whispered. He smiled faintly. She also asked if you'd come to dinner next week. Just family. No surprises. I hesitated, then nodded. Maybe I said, but things will have to be different this time. I think she knows that, he said softly, and for the first time I believed him. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. The same driveway I'd parked in hundreds of times before felt strangely unfamiliar. The porch light flickered the same creak of the old steps greeting me as I climbed them. I paused before knocking, breathing in the smell of roast chicken that drifted through the air, comforting and dangerous all at once. When the door opened, my mother stood there, hands dusted with flour, eyes searching mine like she wasn't sure if she had the right to hug me. Lauren, she said, voice soft, careful. You came. You invited me. I replied evenly, and for the first time she didn't bristle at my tone. She stepped aside. Dinner's ready. The dining room looked the same, lace tablecloth candles, family photos on the sideboard, but something about the air was different, quieter, like even the walls were holding their breath. Brian and Jenna were already seated with the kids. He looked thinner, tired, maybe even humbled. Hey, he said, his voice lacking the smugness I remembered. Hey, I replied. The meal started cautiously. Small talk about the weather, the kids' schoolwork. My father filled glasses, the clinking of ice breaking the silence. Then halfway through dinner, Tyler looked up at me, a bit of frosting still on his chin. Aunt Lauren, why did you move away? Didn't you like living with us? The table froze. I met his wide, curious eyes and smiled gently. I loved spending time with you, I said. But adults need their own space just like you need your own room to play and sleep. He nodded solemnly. Like how Dad gets mad when I touch his work shirt. Brian chuckled awkwardly. Yeah, kinda like that buddy. My mother cleared her throat. I'm glad you came, she said finally. It's been too long. It has. I agreed, setting down my fork. But before we pretend everything's normal, I need to say something. My father's gaze flickered toward my mother, who straightened slightly, bracing herself. I love you both, I began. But what happened wasn't fair. You asked me to sacrifice everything I worked for, to pay double rent, to give up my room to support Brian's family while you stood by and called it family duty. That wasn't love. That was manipulation. My mother's face tightened, but she didn't interrupt. For years you called me strong. I continued, but what you really meant was that I could handle being used. You said family comes first, but in this family, that always meant Brian came first. The room went silent except for the quiet hum of the fridge. My heart pounded, but I didn't look away. Finally, Mom exhaled, her eyes glistening. You're right, she said softly. The admission stunned me. I wanted to believe I was helping, she continued. But I see now that I made you the caretaker, the one who held everything together. I thought I was protecting your brother. I didn't realize I was breaking you. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The words hung there fragile and raw. Then she reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Lauren. I really am. I stared at her hand, then at my father, who nodded slowly. She means it, he said quietly. We both do. Brian cleared his throat. I owe you an apology too, he said. You were right. About everything. Losing your apartment forced me to grow up. I've been working 6 days a week. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I nodded. I'm glad to hear that. I don't expect you to forgive me, he added. But I wanted you to know I finally get it. What you did, it wasn't selfish. It saved us. My mother's eyes shimmered with tears, and for once I didn't feel bitterness, just exhaustion giving way to release. I forgive you, I said finally. But understand this. Forgiveness isn't permission. Things are going to be different now. Boundaries stay. Understood, Mom whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed her. After that dinner, the air between us shifted delicate but real, like the first thaw after a long winter. I didn't rush to rebuild what had been broken. Instead, I let time prove whether the change was real. Over the next few months, our new rhythm emerged: weekly phone calls, not daily demands. Family dinners twice a month, but at their house, not mine. I came when I wanted to, not when guilt summoned me. Every time I left, I felt lighter, not drained. One quiet Saturday morning, Dad stopped by my new apartment with coffee and a box in his hands. Your mother baked these, he said, setting them on the counter. She's trying. I can tell, I said, smiling. He nodded. She's proud of you, you know. Won't say it, but she tells her friends about your job promotions like they're hers. Maybe one day she'll say it to me, I said softly. She will, he replied, then handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a photo of Grandma's locket, polished, shining again, with a note in Mom's handwriting. Your strength reminds me of her. Thank you for teaching me how to use mine. I pressed the photo to my chest, feeling something in me unclench. That weekend, I visited Brian's new apartment. It was smaller than mine, a modest 2-bedroom, but neat and surprisingly calm. He answered the door wearing a grocery store uniform, a name tag pinned crookedly to his chest. Wow, I teased. Gainful employment looks good on you. He grinned sheepishly. Yeah, well, I figured it out eventually. Inside, Jenna was helping Emma with homework. The kids ran to hug me, and for the first time, I hugged them without resentment. Just love, the kind that didn't demand I burn myself to keep others warm. As I left, Brian followed me to the door. You know, he said, scratching the back of his neck, I used to think you were cold. Always had to be in control. But now I get it. You weren't cold. You were alone. Because we made you that way. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. I met his eyes, steady and kind. Apology accepted. But remember, it's not my job to save you. You've got that now. He nodded. Yeah, I finally do. Months later, I stood in the doorway of my own home, my new home. A small townhouse freshly painted with wide windows and a small garden out front where the sunlight fell just right in the mornings. I'd signed the deed myself. No co-signers. No family strings. My name alone sat on the paper's proof that I'd built a life that couldn't be taken away. I invited only a handful of people to the housewarming, my parents Brian and his family, my best friend Tara and Diana from work. The evening was warm, filled with laughter that didn't feel forced for once. Tara raised her glass first. To Lauren, she said, "For teaching us all that boundaries are just love with self-respect." "Hear, hear," Diana added, clinking her glass. My father smiled proudly, my mother nodding beside him. "To independence," Dad said, "and to family learning when to let it breathe." Everyone cheered softly, even the kids who didn't understand the words, but felt the peace in the room. Later that night, after everyone left, I stepped outside to the small patio. The night was still the city, humming faintly in the distance. The air carried the scent of jasmine and rain from earlier in the day. I looked up at the stars, their soft shimmer reflecting off the silver locket around my neck. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, the years of sacrifice, the guilt, the breaking point. And then the quiet power of choosing myself. My mother's words from that dinner echoed in my mind. I thought I was protecting him. I didn't realize I was breaking you. Now we were both learning that protection isn't love when it costs someone their freedom. I took a deep breath, feeling the calm stretch through me. The girl who once thought love meant endurance was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that saying no wasn't rejection, it was self-preservation. I smiled to myself and whispered, "You made it." The wind stirred gentle and cool as if answering back. I closed the door, turned off the lights, and let the silence finally mine wrap around me like home.